You really can't breathe. Every time I breathe, I go flying down my nose.
This one we can take outside. Let's go outside.
Under the heat of the halogen lights, the air was thick with dust and silence. Cameras stopped rolling. The crew that had spent years laughing through the stench of septic tanks and roadkill stood frozen, pale, and uneasy. Mike Rowe, usually calm, even knee-deep in sludge, stared at the monitor, his face drained of color. What they had just seen through the camera lens didn't make sense. The producer's voice cracked through the headset. Cut. Everyone, step back. Now, within minutes, security was called, the site was evacuated, and the crew was told to keep quiet. Later, the only words anyone would hear from the network were cold and clinical. Production suspended indefinitely. But in the hours before the shutdown, something had been unearthed that no one was supposed to see. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades of exploring America's toughest, dirtiest work, dirty jobs had become part of a story darker than anyone could imagine. For years, Dirty Jobs wasn't just a show. It was a love letter to working-class America. Every episode was a tribute to the men and women who kept the country running behind the scenes, doing the work no one else wanted to do. Mike Rowe didn't play a character. He was one of them, a man who believed that hard work and humility built nations. The show's formula was simple: find a job that made most people cringe and show it with humor and heart. From sewer inspectors to animal renderers, nothing was off limits. It was raw, honest television, and that honesty was exactly what led them to trouble. Because while other productions used sets and scripts, Dirty Jobs went where the real dirt was, often in places forgotten by industry and ignored by regulation. By the time the shutdown happened, the crew had filmed more than 300 episodes. They had been in coal mines, on oil rigs, in slaughterhouses, and inside the belly of decaying factories. But the episode that changed everything was supposed to be routine, a story about an environmental cleanup company in the rural Midwest. The crew arrived in early March, expecting to film the reclamation of an old industrial waste site that locals claimed was being turned into a wildlife reserve. The company had signed all the permits, and the local authorities gave clearance. It was supposed to be just another dirty job, until a retired resident approached them with a warning. He was a gaunt man, gray hair under a baseball cap, eyes tired but alert. He told them not to go near the north side of the property, where the soil sank unnaturally and nothing grew. He said there had been trucks in the night years ago, dumping barrels with no markings, and people who asked too many questions didn't stay long. The crew laughed it off at first, but by mid-afternoon, as they began filming, they realized the air was different there, metallic, heavy, almost sweet. Their drone operator reported interference as soon as it flew near the tree line. The compass readings glitched. Even the microphones began picking up a low hum, like a generator underground. Mike tried to keep the energy up, cracking jokes as he often did. "We've seen worse," he said, slapping his gloves. But there was unease in his voice. When they began to dig, the excavator's shovel hit something solid beneath the surface. Not rock, but metal. A muffled clang that echoed deeper than expected. The cameras zoomed in as workers cleared away layers of compacted soil. What emerged first were corroded barrels, sealed tight, leaking a viscous, dark fluid that shimmered with a greenish hue under sunlight. The company representative on site froze, muttered something about old containment drums, and ordered everyone to stop filming. But Mike, driven by instinct and curiosity, kept the cameras rolling. Within minutes, the air grew unbearable. Crew members coughed and covered their mouths. The liquid released an acrid odor that burned the lungs. Then came the moment that silenced everyone. Beneath one of the drums, as the backhoe scraped another layer away, a shape appeared, unmistakably human. A rib cage, a skull, discolored but intact. Not one, but several. The ground was full of them, tangled, fused with rust and clay. One cameraman stumbled back, whispering, "Those are people." The production manager yelled to cut the feed. The The site supervisor screamed for everyone to move. Mike Rowe stood motionless, eyes fixed on the monitor, watching the live feed of something no one on daytime cable was ever supposed to see. Authorities were called, but before local police even arrived, men in unmarked SUVs pulled up. They wore dark clothing, no insignias, just radios and clipboards. They spoke briefly with the site supervisor, then approached the production crew. One of them ordered all footage handed over for investigation. The drives were sealed in evidence bags. Within an hour, everyone on set was told the episode was canceled due to safety concerns. The crew was sent home with NDAs that forbade them from discussing what happened. Even Mike Rowe's social media went silent. Dirty Jobs vanished from the schedule for the next 3 weeks. It was only later, through whispers among crew members, that the truth began to take shape. The site where they were filming had once belonged to a private defense contractor during the Cold War, rumored to have conducted chemical disposal experiments. When the company went bankrupt, the property was quietly sold to an environmental firm, the same one featured in the episode. The cleanup was apparently more of a cover-up. Those sealed barrels were part of a forgotten operation that involved experimental toxins, and the human remains suggested illegal dumping of workers who'd been exposed. But nothing was officially confirmed. Behind the scenes, the network panicked. Lawyers held emergency meetings. The footage was never returned, and production insurance was suspended under biohazard clauses. When journalists began asking questions about the hiatus, Discovery's PR team released a vague statement. Dirty Jobs is taking a scheduled production break, but insiders leaked to small forums and Reddit threads that it was far from routine. One editor claimed that when he tried to access the backup files, they were remotely wiped. Another said that the footage had triggered an internal audit from a government agency. Then, one night, someone anonymously uploaded a 5-second clip to an obscure video sharing site. Grainy, overexposed, but unmistakable. It showed Mike standing beside a half-buried barrel, staring at what looked like a human jawbone. The clip was taken down within hours. A former crew member later confessed that the discovery haunted them. He described a metallic taste in his mouth for days after the shoot, persistent nosebleeds, and nightmares about voices whispering underground. Another claimed that when he went back to the town weeks later, the entire area had been fenced off, guarded, and marked with federal hazard signs. Locals said helicopters had come at night, trucks rolled in, hauling something out under tarps, and then silence. Meanwhile, Mike Rowe reappeared briefly online. His post was cryptic but unsettling. "We spent years digging into the world's filth. Some dirt isn't meant to be unearthed." Fans flooded his page with questions, but he never elaborated. Interviews were canceled, and the network quietly scrubbed mentions of the toxic cleanup episode from their schedule. The title disappeared from production databases. When Dirty Jobs returned weeks later, it opened with an unusually somber tone. Mike looked thinner, quieter. The humor was there, but the spark was different, as if something had been broken that couldn't be fixed. Investigative reporters tried to connect the dots. Environmental activists discovered that the site's coordinates matched an area previously flagged for contamination linked to a classified Department of Defense project. Official documents were redacted. When one journalist filed a Freedom of Information Act request, the response came back: no records found. Yet satellite images from that same month showed massive excavation equipment on site and new concrete structures built shortly after. The deeper the digging, the stranger the coincidences became. A small-town coroner, long retired, came forward and admitted that several missing persons from the 1980s had been linked to that same area, but the files were sealed. He hinted that victims were likely employees who'd seen too much. He died of a stroke 2 weeks after the interview. His notes vanished. By this point, Dirty Jobs fans were creating their own theories online. Some claimed the show uncovered evidence of human experimentation involving chemical exposure. Others believed it was tied to illegal dumping by a now-defunct government contractor. A few went further, suggesting biological material was found that didn't match any known DNA profiles. Whatever the truth was, No one in authority ever confirmed or denied it. The silence itself became the story. Months later, a whistleblower from inside the network sent an encrypted email to an independent journalist. The message was brief. They told us to bury the footage, same as the bodies. Attached was a partial transcript from the day of the shoot. It ended with the line, "Do not record this part." That file, too, disappeared soon after it was posted. Inside the entertainment industry, Dirty Jobs' abrupt halt became a cautionary tale. Producers whispered about the Roe incident, an example of what happens when reality TV crosses into real reality. Unofficially, insiders said Discovery was pressured by a federal liaison to permanently shelve the footage for reasons of public safety. Others believed the footage revealed corporate crimes that would have triggered massive lawsuits. What was undeniable was that the show's shutdown was immediate and absolute. When filming resumed months later, the locations were noticeably safer, more controlled. Mike stopped doing deep industrial segments. He focused instead on traditional labor, fishing, plumbing, farming, the kind of jobs that didn't risk uncovering classified contamination or mass graves. During one interview, when asked why the show had paused, he simply said, "We needed time to clean up." His smile didn't reach his eyes. But something strange happened after that. Fans noticed certain episodes from previous seasons began disappearing from streaming platforms, not just the contaminated site episode, but others involving old factories and toxic waste. One user documented that every removed episode had been filmed in locations later linked to EPA violations or government investigations. It was as if the show had accidentally built a catalog of America's hidden environmental crimes, and someone didn't want that list public. Then came a final twist. In 2024, during an unrelated podcast appearance, Mike was asked about conspiracy theories. He paused for a long moment, then said, "Sometimes when you dig deep enough, you find the wrong kind of dirt." The host laughed, but Mike didn't. He added, "Not everything you film gets to air. Some stories are better left underground." His words reignited the debate. Bloggers speculated that Dirty Jobs had stumbled upon evidence of chemical disposal tied to government bioweapons research. Others insisted it was simply an old industrial accident. But people who worked on the show knew it was more than that. They remembered the smell, the way electronics malfunctioned, and how the footage disappeared from every drive and backup. One grip told a friend he believed there was something buried there, something living. He died in a car crash 2 weeks later. Over time, the story faded from headlines. Dirty Jobs continued, but the tone had changed permanently. Gone was the unfiltered laughter that had once made even the foulest places feel human. What remained was a quiet respect, a caution, and an unspoken rule among the crew. Never dig where you're told not to. Still, the legend of the lost episode persisted. Every few years, someone online claimed to have seen fragments of the footage. Grainy images of bone fragments, barrels marked with indecipherable codes, and a shot of Mike Rowe walking away from the dig site under a blood-red sunset. None of it was ever verified, but each claim reignited the question, what exactly was buried out there? When asked privately, one of the original producers once said, "We wanted to celebrate honest work, but we uncovered the dirtiest job of all, the cover-up." Years later, the old industrial site was converted into a fenced-off, renewable energy facility. No tours, no photos, no public access. Locals say the ground still glows faintly at night after the rain. Some even claim they've heard machinery humming underground when the wind is still. Whether that's the echo of buried generators or something else, no one can prove. But no one dares to go near it anymore. As for Mike Rowe, he continued his mission of honoring the workforce, but he never again mentioned the event. In one rare interview, he said quietly, "Sometimes the dirtiest jobs aren't the ones we show. They're the ones we're forced to hide." His eyes drifted off camera. "You wouldn't believe what's buried under this country." The cameraman asked him to clarify, but Mike only smiled, a weary, haunted smile, and said, "Let's keep rolling." In the years since, The phrase "dirty jobs shut down" has become shorthand in Hollywood for any production halted for reasons that can't be discussed publicly. It serves as a reminder that sometimes, beneath the surface of entertainment, there's a layer of truth too dangerous to expose. And yet, the question still lingers, whispered on late-night forums and by those who once worked in the mud beside him. What did they really find? Was it toxic waste, human experimentation, or something buried deeper, evidence of a secret that rewrote what the show was ever meant to be? No official answers have ever surfaced. The documents remain sealed, the footage erased, but the site remains off-limits, patrolled, its boundaries marked by warning signs that read, "Hazardous materials, do not enter." It's ironic, perhaps poetic, that a show built on the courage to face filth and decay met its end when the dirt it uncovered was too real, too incriminating. Dirty Jobs wanted to show the backbone of America, the honest labor beneath the shine of civilization. Instead, it accidentally peeled back the surface and revealed something America was never meant to see. And somewhere out there, under a forgotten field fenced with barbed wire, the cameras that stopped rolling that day lie buried. Silent witnesses to a discovery that brought one of television's most authentic shows to its knees. When Mike Rowe looks back now, he probably still hears the echoes of that day, the hum beneath the ground, the sound of shovels scraping metal, and the voice that whispered through the headset just before the feed went dark, "Cut the cameras." Now, for a moment, he must have wondered whether the real dirty job wasn't the one in front of him, but the one he'd just been forced to bury forever. Months passed before anyone dared mention the incident again. The network wanted to move on, and so did the crew, at least publicly. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Not when there are loose ends, unpaid silence fees, and men with guilty consciences. In late 2024, a small online collective of former industry technicians released what they claimed were fragments of deleted Dirty Jobs data. The files were encrypted, incomplete, and heavily corrupted, but one video clip stood out, a single uncut minute of shaky handheld footage. It showed a dark tunnel lit by a headlamp, Mike Rowe's voice faint in the background saying, "We're not supposed to be here." Then the camera tilted down to something in the soil, a half-melted badge with a government seal and the letters BIOPROJECT47. The file vanished from the server hours later, but dozens of users had already mirrored it. Within days, Reddit threads exploded with speculation that the show had uncovered remnants of a classified toxic research program. Those who examined the clip claimed the tunnel looked far too deep and uniform to be part of the surface excavation. It appeared more like an access corridor, reinforced decades ago. Some noticed faint stenciling on the walls, hazard symbols from the 1960s, used during Cold War bioweapon containment projects. Others pointed out that Rowe's flashlight beam briefly caught a glint of glass jars stacked in the dirt, each one sealed and labeled with numbers instead of names. The lighting was poor, but one frame captured something else. A shape inside one of the jars that looked unmistakably organic, like a fragment of tissue preserved in amber fluid. Skeptics said it was pareidolia, a trick of light. Believers said it was proof. 2 weeks after the leak, the anonymous uploader's account disappeared, wiped clean. Then a digital forensics expert who had archived the clip reported that his storage drives had been remotely accessed and reformatted. He went public on a live stream, claiming that a private cybersecurity firm with federal contracts had contacted him, warning of national security implications. The feed cut mid-sentence. His followers said his home was later found empty, lights still on. Meanwhile, the old Midwest site reappeared on corporate land registries under a new name, Omnitech Resource Reclamation, LLC. The address matched the contaminated area where the show had filmed. Satellite images revealed new concrete domes built over the original excavation zone. Local residents reported night shifts and industrial trucks operating without license plates. When a small group of activists tried to approach the fence line, they were met by armed security who claimed it was federal remediation work. The activists were detained for trespassing and released hours later without explanation. Mike Rowe, when asked again in a later interview, maintained his calm composure. But when the journalist pressed about the leaked footage, his tone changed. "If people are finding things out there," he said softly, "then maybe the cleanup's not done yet." He smiled faintly, then looked straight at the camera and added, "Some jobs you can't wash off." It was the last time he spoke on record about it. Behind the scenes, whispers grew louder. A crew electrician revealed in confidence that before the shutdown, they'd noticed their dosimeters spiking, a sign of radiation or chemical energy. Another said he'd overheard a government agent mention biological vectors during the cleanup. None of them wanted to believe it. After all, Dirty Jobs was supposed to show ordinary heroes, not uncover evidence of buried science gone wrong. The production company that owned the footage eventually dissolved, absorbed by a larger media conglomerate. All contracts related to the show's archives were transferred, and soon after, the original raw footage backups were listed as lost in transfer. But employees from that era remembered a peculiar event, a corporate memo instructing IT to purge metadata associated with hazardous content, episode 203A. That was the exact shoot date of the shutdown. Over time, those who had been there began to distance themselves. One camera operator left television entirely, moving off-grid to rural Oregon. A sound engineer died suddenly of respiratory failure. Another crew member developed strange skin lesions that doctors couldn't diagnose. Some whispered of chemical exposure, others of guilt, a burden of knowing something that could never be said aloud. In late 2025, a former field producer anonymously published a written statement on a dark web forum known for whistleblower leaks. It was titled simply, "The Dirt They Tried to Bury." The message claimed the barrels weren't the worst part. Below them was a lower chamber, built into the bedrock, with rusted steel doors sealed by lead bolts. Inside, they found decommissioned lab equipment, faded notebooks, and human test logs dated from the late 1970s. The signature on one of the pages allegedly matched an employee from a government-funded biochemistry division later tied to Project MK/ARCLIGHT, a rumored Cold War initiative exploring biological weapon storage. The post ended with a single line: "We stopped filming when we realized the bodies weren't just workers. They were subjects." It's impossible to confirm if the statement was true. No one who tried to verify it stayed in the public eye long enough to say. But even skeptics admit one thing: the shutdown wasn't just a random production halt. It was too sudden, too absolute. And so, the legend continues to evolve. The idea that a show about ordinary people stumbled upon extraordinary danger, that in trying to honor the value of dirty work, they uncovered the dirtiest secret of all. Whether it was toxic waste, biological research, or something beyond classification, the truth remains buried with the footage. Every now and then, during reruns, viewers claim to catch strange edits, jump cuts, audio glitches, brief flashes of frames showing dark tunnels or unidentifiable symbols. Editors say it's compression errors. But to those who still believe the story, those are fragments of the episode that was never supposed to air. And if you listen closely during the closing credits, in one of the final surviving promos from that season, you can still hear Mike Rowe's voice saying, almost as an afterthought, "There's always more beneath the surface." For most people, it was just a catchy tagline. But for those who were there that day, for those who saw what was unearthed, it was a warning.